Hi everyone, welcome to the Evaluation Training for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Great Stories Club. This session is a presentation of ALA's Public Programs Office and Become with support from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. My name is Samantha Oakley. I'm a program officer here in the Public Programs Office and will be acting as your ALA contact for evaluation throughout the grant period. During the project, all of you will be working with Become, our independent evaluators for the initiative. Become is a center for community engagement and social change that seeks to cultivate a socially just world through culturally responsive evaluation, research, and community development. We are excited to be working with Become and are pleased to have Rita Fierro and Anita Cram from the organization with us today to walk you through the evaluation expectations and process for the initiative. And with that, I'll turn things over to Rita and Anita.
Next slide, please. Hi, my name is Anita Cram, and I am an independent consultant from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am an Indigenous evaluator and have a background in Indigenous evaluation theory, or kaupapa Māori, which is a culturally responsive Indigenous approach to evaluation. I recently completed my Masters of Evaluation from the University of Melbourne in Australia and have over 5 years of experience working in the field. I have been working with Become on this project for the past few months, and I am the new program manager for this project.
It's great to meet you all. Thank you, Anita. I'm happy to be partnering with you on this today. My name is Dr. Rita Fierro, and I am currently the project lead for the American Libraries Association program evaluation for the Great Stories Club, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And I have my own firm called Fierro Consulting LLC, and like Become, whose umbrella we're working under, really focus on community engagement and having evaluation be useful to the people who really can make a difference. And so I was honored to participate in the evaluation of the pilot of this work, and I'm really excited to see us continue with the same quality of work that we saw in the pilot so that we can continue to expand this work nationally as well. And yeah, and just a word about Become, which is the organization that we represent. So Become really is committed to using culturally responsive evaluation, research, and community development to cultivate a socially just world. So we have a focus on looking at culture and context, and we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. And culturally responsiveness is present in all the ways in which Become works, including how we approach evaluation and engaging with stakeholders. The stakeholders are, like, you're a stakeholder right here, right now, because you're involved in this project. And we'll go into more detail about what culturally responsive evaluation is in the course of the presentation.
So what we're going to focus on today is we're going to provide an overview of what evaluation is in terms of both evaluation thinking and theory, including what it is, why it's important, and how it will apply to the work that you're doing with the Great Stories Club. Next slide, please. So the structure for today's talk will be, we will provide an introduction and overview of evaluation thinking and theory, then what evaluation is and its purpose, the types of program evaluation, what evaluation thinking is, evaluation theory, culture and context, and then how that applies to the evaluation of the American Library Association's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Great Stories Club.
So the first thing that evaluation is focused on, like, many people think of evaluation in terms of teacher evaluation, think about like good or bad. Like the first thing that comes to mind when we think about evaluation, right, is good or bad. And program evaluation isn't really focused on what's good or bad. What it's focused on is, what is your purpose? Like, what is your purpose for working together? What is the direction you mean to go in? Like the arrow on this image right now. What is the direction you mean to go in? And how is what you're doing and the results that you're getting aligned with where it is that you intend to go? And in that regard, evaluation, while in this case there's a program evaluation, there's a staff who's doing evaluation, we also do evaluation at different points in our lives, kind of informally in and of ourselves, because we're always asking ourselves, what is our purpose? And is what we're doing serving the purpose we're out to cause? And so in that regard, evaluation is very familiar. So evaluation can be used to examine if you're making progress towards your purpose, as I just said. Evaluation can look at how your purpose is being achieved. And evaluation can inform how you move forward to realize your goals. Anita, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. So evaluation can be making a judgment about the amount, number, or value of something. So as Rita mentioned before, we are constantly doing evaluation in our day-to-day lives. So as an example, whether to wear a woolen jumper or a light jacket. And because it's currently in summer going into fall, while we're recording this, you might decide to wear a light jacket because it's warm out, and if you wear the jumper, you know from previous experience that you'll probably be a bit too hot. So that is making an evaluation judgment. So when focusing in on programs, which can be an initiative, an organization, as an example, evaluation can be a set of activities designed to learn the impact of a program, policy, or initiative, with the purpose essentially being to improve.
So at its best, evaluation is not a result, it's a process. And we call it an iterative process because it's in a circle and it's a cycle that starts in one place and then keeps going. And each time that we go through this cycle, we learn more and more and deepen our learning journey. And so what is this process? What is this? So first, typically, we engage stakeholders, which means involving people who have a stake in the evaluation, in the program. So in this case, stakeholders can be the students or the teachers or the administrators or you as libraries, right? Or library directors. And it could be also the community itself, like the parents of the youth and so on and so forth. So we tend to engage stakeholders in the beginning so that we can plan the process in a way that incorporates the perspectives of different people who are impacted by the program or who care about it. And then once we've had these conversations, then we develop evaluation questions, which allow us to get really, really clear about what the focus is and what exactly learning journey what do we want to learn from this inquiry, because evaluation is inquiry. Then we go and collect the data, analyze the data, and data can be statistics, it can be a survey, it can be an interview, it can be gathering a story or observing the classroom. Data is as varied as you can think of it. Then we analyze all this information, which basically means gathering a bunch of different sources, putting it all together, and seeing what is the big picture that the information is pointing us to. And then finally disseminating it. Within this case will be done through a report. For those of you who have seen the webinar on the results of the pilot, that's another way to disseminate. And then we just kind of start all over again. And so each year, ideally in a program evaluation, each year you get to deepen your learning and you get to understand more and more and sort of have like layers of learning.
So there are four main types of evaluation: process, formative, summative, and developmental. So process evaluation determines whether program activities have been implemented as intended. So you might do this in the early stages of a program's life cycle. As an example, if you're piloting a program and you're unsure of how you're delivering the program, you would do a process evaluation. So typically it focuses in on program activities and looking at the chain from inputs, activities to outputs, and seeing how well that is being implemented. So similar to process evaluation, formative evaluation ensures that a program or program activity is feasible, appropriate, and acceptable before it is fully implemented. So it's a way of providing evidence-informed formative feedback as the program grows and develops. It is usually conducted when a new program or activity is being developed or when an existing one is being adapted or modified. Summative evaluation, like the name would suggest, is a summation. It's usually conducted once a program has been running for a number of years and is fairly well established and set in how it's being delivered. It helps to answer the questions around outcomes, what has worked, what hasn't. It is really a way of assessing the program in its entirety. Developmental evaluation. So this approach is a little different to the other three. Developmental evaluation is an evaluation approach that can assist social innovators develop social change initiatives in their complex or uncertain environments. Developmental evaluation is particularly suited to innovation, radical program redesign, replication, complex issues, and so on. The next slide, please.
So I mentioned slightly before that what we just mentioned is evaluation, program evaluation. And that's when you really have like a staff and a plan and a project the way we do in this case. And what underlies, or the umbrella under which all evaluations fall, is evaluative thinking. Evaluative thinking is a critical thinking process by which, as Anita was mentioning earlier, you decide, are you going to wear a sweater, or are you going to wear a light jacket, or are you going to wear both? You do that based on past experience of having known data, so experience, like that in the summer there's AC in a lot of places, and so as much as it's hot outside, you may be cold inside, so you bring something in your bag. And so there is a gathering of data that we do on a day-to-day basis. If you think about the very structures that had agriculture become a science, or almost anything become a science, it went by a number of trials and errors that early humans and indigenous people went through in order to ensure that something actually worked. So evaluative thinking, it's fair to say that evaluative thinking is not a new thing. It's not something that a consultant has to come in and do. It's something that is actually integrated into every aspect of our human experience. We are doing evaluative thinking all the time. So it's critical thinking, it's an attitude of inquisitiveness, it's a belief in the value of use of data to inform reflective practice. It means identifying assumptions, posing thoughtful questions, pursuing a deeper understanding through reflection and perspective taking, and informing decisions in preparation for action. So that's a quote from Archibald, which is one evaluation scholar. And you can see from this, right, posing thoughtful questions, like we do that at every step of our lives in different area of our lives. So practically when you have a firm or consultant doing an evaluation, what we're working on is bringing that attitude of inquisitiveness and critical thinking to every step, so that the evaluative thinking is explicit instead of implicit. Generally in our regular life, it's pretty implicit. Next slide, please. So the result of evaluative thinking is more evidence gathering and sharing. So sometimes we can get information and it can just create more curiosity about another aspect of the work. More feedback in all directions, so we can get more feedback from a number of people who have a number of different perspectives and approaches. Reflective conversations among those involved. More diagram models used to illustrate thinking. Program evolution, so it's like a conscious, things evolve anyway, whether we're conscious of them or not. Evaluative thinking allows us to consciously and intentionally have the program evolve in the direction in which we'd like to see it evolve. And more effective staffs and programs. And finally, a greater field staff influence over project decisions. So people who are actually involved in the work get to share their insights in a way that is anonymous, so that their insights can be compiled and have more influence over whatever the next round is. So at this point, we're going to jump into some evaluation theory. We're just going to offer you like a really, really quick and dirty overview, just so that you know this, not so much evaluation theory in general, which would be out of the scope of this webinar. We'd like to give you like two foundational theoretical frameworks that this program evaluation, the one of the TRHT, is grounded in. So the two are culturally responsive evaluation and utilization-focused evaluation. Next slide. So culturally responsive evaluation is really the confluence of these three elements, like culture, context, and community, and watching how all these three overlap. So there's a Venn diagram, you see that each overlap, and then there's that center point at which all three overlap at the same time. So the culture is the culture of the people who are participating in the program. And the context is whatever is that larger context, which can be historical context, citywide context. It can be the number of policies and experiences that people are having. It can be a school environment in the case of a school, or an institution in the case of the institution. And then community, like what are the set of relationships that people have? And so if we look at culture, context, and community, another aspect of culturally responsive evaluation is that it's looking at what are the strengths. So oftentimes when we think about, in particular, communities of color, we tend to put a deficit lenses on it. We tend to look at communities of color just for what they don't have. In a culturally responsive evaluation framework, we really want to look at what are the strengths. And not just the weaknesses. So what are the strengths of the communities that we're serving? What are the strengths in the culture? What aspects of the culture have the culture be resilient and endure tremendous distress or loss? What are the strengths about the context that have the program actually work and move forward because of like whatever the roots are of kind of what people are experiencing then? And then the three of these pieces together create that kind of sweet spot at the center, which is also, we have an arrow for critical reflection at the bottom, but that piece at the center is actually what you could see as critical self-reflection. And critical self-reflection requires that as people who are involved in a process of inquiry, we constantly ask ourselves, okay, are there assumptions that I'm making about culture? Are there assumptions that I'm making about community? Are there assumptions that I'm making about context? And how can I unpack those assumptions so that they don't directly influence my work in a negative way, but I can unpack them so that my work is freer to flow in that direction. one second, I want to see if I'd love to come up with an example. So if we think about if we think about some of the sites that have had the TRHT, so if you think about the example of a juvenile justice school that has the TRHT, the context is extremely important. So we learned in the pilot that if safety guards were in the room, there was a very different dynamic with the youth. So that makes complete sense for the context, right? The amount of support that you have at the school, the extent to which you have built strong partnerships with the institutions in which you're doing the program is extremely important. What's the culture, right? So is this a culture that's predominantly Latino, or is it a culture that's predominantly Eastern European? Like, what is the culture that's predominant at the school, and what's the culture of the youth compared to the culture of the teachers? Like, what are the different interactions of cultures there as well? And again, as community, you can think about, like, what is the history of this institution in the community? So an elementary school that's been in the community for 50 years will have a very different relationship with the community than a juvenile justice institution that was just opened up yesterday or a year ago, despite the protests of local citizens. So just things to be taken into account, both in the way you implement the program, and this kind of information is what we look at when we think about the evaluation. Next slide.
So take a moment now to pause and reflect. How do you see culture and context playing out in this work in your community? How can we respond to culture and context at your sites? So being from a different culture myself, there are certain nuances about a culture that informs the way that people act and behave. And so this kind of being aware of that and understanding that certain groups may respond differently to a program in a particular context is really important for the work that we do. Next slide, please. So another evaluation approach is utilization-focused evaluation, which, like the name would suggest, focuses in on utility and ensuring that the findings that arise from evaluation are useful. Yes, so as an example, you would involve those who would use the results in designing the evaluation, so that not only are they seeing the results from the evaluation, but they are walking alongside you and understand the process every step of the way. Next slide, please. So in this section, we will transition from thinking about evaluation in theory to the specifics of the Truth and Racial Healing Story Club evaluation. As previously mentioned, this is the second year into this evaluation project. So our evaluation of the program looks at the current strategies and expected outcomes, and we compare them to the actual results of the program during and after implementation across sites. As you know, the American Library Association Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Great Stories Club provides specialized services to high needs teen populations by delivering books, programming, resources, in-person discussion, events, and access to racial healing practitioners for those who do not normally have access to these opportunities. It fosters grassroots partnerships with organizations that serve high needs youth, providing young people with vital connections to libraries and other non-profits that can be important to success after graduation, incarceration, or other periods of change. And it presents a nationally recognized, closely curated collection of books that reflects the diverse identities and experiences of young adults, especially those from traditionally underrepresented racial and ethnic groups.
one of the tools that we use in program evaluation is to come up with what we call a theory of change. So a theory of change is literally a theoretical framework that has us discover why we're investing in certain activities to achieve a certain result. And so what is it that we're investing on to get what kind of experience for what kind of result? If you wish, it's sort of an underlying formula that just undergirds all of the work. And so the theory of change we came up for this work is that the staple input is human equity through storytelling, which means that participants and stakeholders are, by reading certain books and engaging in discussion, reflections, and literary analysis, can connect the text to life, right? And so the text, the storytelling, have an opportunity to have both the youth and the staff reflect on dynamics of privilege and dynamics of power and social inequity, so that staff and youth together can process, or staff can help youth process the experience of social inequity that they have in their lives, and can help them enhance their awareness about it. The next is that all this happen in an atmosphere in which the youth know they're valued. So they experience being valued in the experience because they're being heard and respected, and especially for the high need youth that we work with, that they have an opportunity to be at the center of the program instead of living at the margins as they're usually used to. And so program staff get also an opportunity to deepen their understanding of high need youth by being in these active conversations around social inequity and understanding their experience more. And finally, participants and stakeholders build relationships as they receive access to support networks. So the experience of being valued is also the experience of the program as you get to connect with the institutions that are holding you, that are hosting you, so that there can be a really, really strong partnership there. And then finally, that as a result, we have powerful agents of change. So that means that youth, while they're reading books, get an opportunity to experience themselves as powerful agents of change, which means becoming empowered, self-reliant, autonomous, as actors in their own life, and get to kind of shift their framework in terms of how they think about society and how they think about people around them. But it also means that teachers get to experience themselves as powerful agents of change as well, and librarians as well, because you have an opportunity to build these partnerships with the institutions in which you are, and be, not only have deeply impacted the perceptions that youth have of themselves, but also impact the relationship between the library and the host institutions. So each of these components, human equity through storytelling, through an experience of being valued, generated powerful agents of state, of change, is kind of, again, an iterative process where these three factors are interlaced and intertwined with each other. And we can think of them at different levels. So we can think about these three components at the level of participants, so the youth. We can think about it for teachers and for librarians and for host institutions. Ideally, we would like to see, our theory of change is that we would see change at all of those levels. Next slide. So the evaluation, oh, sorry, Anita, go ahead.
So one of the key components to designing an evaluation is to have clear and good quality evaluation. So for this evaluation, we have 7 questions, which I will go through now. So what strategies, activities, processes, and content that engage youth and support youth participation in all 4 sessions in their library of the TRHT GSC? And a branch of that is, what were the most helpful strategies in building meaningful relationships with the youth participants? Second question, for staff and youth, how effective was the TRHT GSC in shifting narrative change and expanding on understanding of personal and structural racism and human equity?
Hold that for 1 minute, Anita. I just want to put something around narrative change because I didn't really explain it in the prior slide.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So what we mean by narrative change is, how do participants see a shift in oversimplification of roles, either themselves or in society? So typically, like the typical roles in a story, right, are hero, victim, savior, right? And so one of the things that we want to look like as a narrative change is that most texts bring out a complexity in the character where you can see that no one individual is either one or the other. And being able to have participants see that complexity both in the narratives that they're studying and in their own narrative of life is part of what has them be agents of change. Like, to allow themselves to have a complexity around their own personality and recognize the same in the roles that other people take in society as well. That's what that means, shifting narrative change. That's what that means. Thank you, Anita. Go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no problem. So the third question is, how were the racial healing circles implemented? Next slide. So question number 4, what was the structure and process of community partnerships for assisting youth in their process of racial healing? Question 5, to what extent has the self-perceptions of young people and librarians as agents of change shifted over the course of the grant program period? Question 6, what can be improved in future iterations of the program for young people and librarians? Question 7, what is needed within ALA and beyond to support the sustainability of this work in libraries?
So the evaluation questions that we just highlighted, that Anita just highlighted, are the overarching umbrellas that guide our inquiry. So we're interested in exploring those questions to understand more about the project. So those aren't questions we're asking you directly. Those are the questions that our work is meant to address. And so when our final results are available and our final report is available, you'll be able to see some answers to those questions. You can also look online and see the answers to those questions that we found as a result of the pilot of the first 5 months of the project's implementation. Okay, so going forward, sitting with those questions and wanting to discover more, what's required of you, right? I'm sure the question everyone was asking was ready for. So what's required of you for us to gather the information and be able to really answer these questions about how this project has made a difference and where we can improve it, is first to complete surveys and Qualtrics at the end of each book. So it's 3 surveys in total. We ask that you complete a survey online at the end of each book. And that link will be made available to you through your manager, I'm sure. Then participate in the library project director interviews for selected sites. So we're gonna choose some sites to speak directly with the project directors. And those interviews are basically for us to learn more about what your experience was, what were the glitches, what do you think worked particularly well, what would need to change going forward, and whether there are conditions that were set for the project to be sustainable, which means to be able to live in your library even past this grant. And then also for selected sites, we'll be doing youth focus groups and interviews. And that, again, is an opportunity to ask similar questions, like less from an adult perspective and more from a youth perspective, of the youth who were in the discussions, so that we can learn directly from youth. What do they think worked really well? What did they learn? And how it made a difference for them. And then we have one optional collection tool, which is uploading logs into the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation GSC portal. And that will be accessible as of April 1st. And the logs are really self-reflective practice for the person who facilitated the discussion. They're optional, given that they take, we made them optional to not burden you, and just in terms of like people learning to self-reflect and become better facilitators. I've often heard that people who facilitate, like taking the time to actually journal and answer those questions right after they facilitate, is a great way to improve their skill set. The self-reflective practice can really impact the quality of their work moving forward. Next slide. So here's an example of the kind of survey items that you will find in Qualtrics. Go ahead, Anita.
So yes, here are some sample questions from the survey that you will take. So as an example, when discussing this book, what strategies do you think worked well for supporting narrative change with participants? So you can kind of see how that links back to the overarching key evaluation questions that we ran through just before. And so essentially, we want to get an insight into how delivering the program has been for you and your program site. Because we can't go and observe every site across America, as there are a fair number of you, filling out the logs, as Rita mentioned on the previous slide, and also filling out these surveys is really important so that we get a good insight into how well this program has worked for you, your site, and the students that have participated.
Next slide. So this is an example of the log and the self-reflective process I was mentioning before. You can see you get to kind of look at different sections of your facilitation and kind of give yourself a rating for whether the implementation was really close to how you intended it to be or very different from how you intended it to be. And it splits it up by introduction, discussion, question, activity, and closing. And then what we're really asking are, what questions did you ask? And what notes do you have? And what's really helpful on the sample log is that you offer us some examples of things you've said or times where you could really see the youth shifting their perspective or learning or being really engaged in the book. It's really a it's really a great opportunity for us to have more texture in terms of having more experience of what this is like for youth. And just to emphasize again, we're not evaluating you as a facilitator, right? That's not one of the questions. You saw what our questions are. We're being fully transparent with it. What we're interested in is how is this experience really landing for the youth so that we can implement changes nationwide, right? There's 70 other programs across the nation. And we're really looking at that big picture and wanting to discover what else is needed for us to implement this in a really exceptional way. And so some of the other things we're asking you for self-reflective praxis is a wow moment, like a moment that a student really surprised you, or things that made you go, like things that made you wonder or get curious. And then, oops, better not do that again. And these are all opportunities, again, for us to see, like, were this to be launched again, like what additional training could be needed, or what worked really well that we should keep, or what more is needed, either in materials or training or anything else. So we really invite you to be as honest and generous and transparent as you can be. And more detail for the sample logs, for us, the more detail the better. So whatever you're willing to, we all know you have time constraints, and we absolutely respect those. And whatever additional details you want to offer us, we really welcome, because we can use those examples in our reporting, and it'll really help us have this come alive. So the more you can put us in the room with you, you unfortunately don't have the funding to observe every room and every class, but the more we can be in the room with you and you can share your experience, so we can get as excited or disappointed or curious as you are, the better. So we welcome it all. Thank you. Next slide. So in terms of like where does this information go next? I mentioned it a little bit to you, but here it is again. So there's going to be a report written, and at the completion of the project, and then we'll do another presentation online, similar to this one, similar to the one with the results of the pilot study. And so if you just kind of check where the website is on the American Libraries Association website, just keep an eye on that. And as soon as the report is available, and it's been, I'm sure as soon as it's available for public consumption, it'll be there. Also, again, what we're interested in is just not reporting. I promised myself about 10 years ago that I wouldn't write reports that end up on a shelf. What we're really interested in is getting information that can help improve the program and improve the process of it. We're interested in looking for the social impact to see how things can change moving forward. And what we know is that ALA has a really, really deep commitment to shifting youth's lives, to bringing forth conversations around equity, and to explaining the role and the influence of libraries in communities. And so this project is a really unique opportunity because it's like it's being implemented throughout the country. And so our information also is an opportunity for ALA to deepen its commitment to things that are already important and understand more how to gear their attention and their resources moving forward. So I'm done, Anita, go ahead.
But yes, so please feel free to contact either Rita, Samantha, or myself if you have any questions. Both Rita and I will be at the ALA workshop in October. And I'm also looking forward to meeting a few of you, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have there as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. And again, feel free to send us questions. We're really open. And there's nothing we love more than curiosity, given that this is our work. So feel free to bring your curiosity forth and let us know anything. And any conversation you have with us is anonymous and protected. So you can kind of let us know, like, if there's anything that we can support you in. Samantha, back to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rita and Anita, for leading us through the evaluation expectations for this grant. We're looking forward to working with you all throughout the course of the project. Thank you.
Thank you all.
And you can stop the recording.